Hi, I'm David,
And I'm Scully.
and we're here to tell you about Epicureanism
Epicureanism
and
and
death.
death.
Now, Epicurus has a disarmingly simple argument about why death is not something we should be afraid of. He asks, if death is such a bad thing, at what time is it bad? And he says, death can't be bad during the time that we're alive, because we're not dead yet. And death can't be bad after we're dead.
Because being dead is great.
So Epicurus was a Greek philosopher who lived in the late 4th and early 3rd centuries BCE. He was the founder of the aptly named Epicurean school of philosophy, which was one of the major schools of Hellenistic philosophy. The Hellenistic period in Western philosophy is the one that follows in the centuries after Alexander the Great, when Alexander's conquests had brought the Greek city-state system to an end, but also had spread Greek knowledge and learning across the Eastern Mediterranean and across the Middle East. So one of the central preoccupations of the Hellenistic period was with what they called ataraxia, or tranquility or freedom from disturbance. The thought was that these different Hellenistic schools, Epicureanism was one, Stoicism was another major one, skepticism another major one, all of them were concerned with finding tranquility, finding a way of living, a way of thinking, a way of being that would bring about inner peace. But they weren't simply aiming at inner peace. They were usually building sophisticated systems of thought around which they could advocate this idea of ataraxia. So, for example, Epicurus advocated a materialistic worldview. He thought that there was nothing in the world except matter, and that matter was ultimately composed of atoms. He also maintained that the gods, although they exist, have no interest in our lives. And so we're just living out these material lives in the absence of any kind of supernatural powers or supernatural entities. And for Epicurus, the main good in life is pleasure. This is why we, to this day, use the word Epicurean to describe an interest in various kinds of refined pleasures. But for Epicurus, the best pleasures aren't actually rich food and drink and sex and all of the rest. They're rather much more simple and modest pleasures, most notably just the freedom from pain. If you're free from pain, you're at peace, you found ataraxia, you're happy. He also advocated friendship as a stable source of value. But the thought was that all these more exciting pleasures ultimately lead to more pain in the long run. So if you're a wise and sophisticated pleasure seeker, as Epicurus sought to be, you'll set aside those desires for the rich pleasures and pursue the simpler, subtler pleasures of friendship and freedom from disturbance. Epicurus's ethical teachings were later summed up in what's known as the Tetrapharmakos, the four-part remedy. And it goes like this: don't fear the gods, don't fear death, the good is easy to obtain, and the bad is easy to endure. The thought is, as I mentioned before, the gods don't really care about us. They don't need our sacrifices. They're not going to punish us if we go against their will. They live perfectly happy, blessed lives, and what we do or don't do is of no concern to them. So just don't worry about the gods. I'll say more about death in a minute. The good is easy to attain as long as you aim for the simpler pleasures that Epicurus aspires to. And likewise, the bad is easy to endure. Sharp pains don't last a long time. Other pains don't last very long either. And in particular, he thinks that a lot of the suffering we endure is self-inflicted. That, if you are ambitiously chasing after political prestige, or if you become addicted to wine, then you're going to suffer a lot when things don't work out for you. But as long as you keep life simple, it's not going to get that bad for you. And the thought with this tetrapharmakos is that as much as physical pains are a source of suffering for us, the main source of suffering is anxiety, is a kind of mental anguish or torment. And so for Epicurus, finding a happy, pleasant life, one of the key features is just to free us from that kind of anxiety. And he thinks about what are the things that cause us anxiety? Well, there's the gods, there's death, there's the prospect of not getting what you want, and there's the prospect of all the bad things that might happen to you. And so he wants to provide a teaching that will just put us at ease about those things. And so he's teaching about why death is not something that should worry us. is a key part of this broader aspiration to achieve ataraxia, of freedom from disturbance. The thought is, death is a big source of anxiety. If I can make you not worry about death, I've made your life more pleasant. Epicurus' argument for why we shouldn't fear death is disarmingly simple. He basically asks, if death is so bad, at what time is it bad? And he says, look, death can't be bad for me while I'm alive because I'm not dead yet. And it can't be bad for me after I'm dead because there's no me there to experience the badness of death. So it's not bad while I'm alive, it's not bad after I'm alive. There's no time at which death is bad for me, so death clearly isn't bad. Now, there are a couple of assumptions that are baked into this argument, and I think the most notable one is the idea that if something is going to be bad for me, I have to, in some sense, experience its badness. So in particular, the argument that death can't be bad for me after I'm dead presupposes the idea that it's only when I'm experiencing badness, it's only when I'm positively suffering, that something can be bad for me. Now, Thomas Nagel, among other people, builds an argument to the effect that there are actually certain things that can be bad for us, even though we're not experiencing their badness. So, for example, if my partner is cheating on me behind my back, I might be blissfully unaware of this fact, but you might still say that something bad is happening to me, even though I'm not experiencing its badness. Similarly, Nagel suggests, if I were to have some catastrophic accident that rendered me into the mental capacities of a contented infant, um, that would be, to all intents and purposes, bad for me, even though as this contented infant, I wouldn't experience any badness. Now, Nagel's arguments are part of a broader form of arguing for the badness of death, and I'll talk about that more in a separate lecture. But it's called the deprivation account. The idea is that death is bad not because of some positive experience of badness, but because of what it deprives us of. It deprives us of the goods of life. And it's not clear that Epicurus has an entirely satisfactory answer to the claim that death is bad not because we experience anything bad, but rather because we miss out on experiencing good things. Although it is worth noting that Epicurus' account of the goodness of pleasure is independent of time, that he says that what makes for the most stable pleasures is precisely that they're static, that they don't have any kind of attachment to time. So, for example, the pleasure I get from eating is one that begins when I start eating and it ends when I stop eating. But the more enduring pleasures aren't ones that I need more of in order to have a happy life. And so being deprived of more of them isn't necessarily a bad thing for me. The most influential Epicurean philosopher besides Epicurus himself is Lucretius, who was a Roman philosopher who lived in the first half of the first century BCE, so in the last decades of the Roman Republic before it became an empire. And he is famous for having written De Rerum Natura, on the nature of things, on the nature of the universe is how it's usually translated. It's a philosophical poem in which Lucretius lays out an Epicurean worldview in beautiful verse. And it ended up having tremendous impact on the Renaissance and the Enlightenment many, many centuries after it was written. And in chapter 3 of De Rerum Natura, Lucretius lays out a number of reasons why we shouldn't fear death. A number of them are familiar rehashes of what you already find in Epicurus, but one that gets a lot of attention from philosophers is what's sometimes known as the symmetry argument. Lucretius says, look, if you're so afraid of the period of non-existence that is going to follow your death, why are you not equally troubled by the period of non-existence that preceded your birth? If pre-birth doesn't trouble you, why does post-death trouble you? They're both long periods of non-existence, and neither of them should cause us any concern. So if we want to object to Lucretius' argument, if we're not going to find that argument convincing, we have two possibilities. One would be to say that actually there is some important difference between the period of non-existence before my birth and the period of non-existence after my death. And the other would be to say that actually it is a great misfortune that I'm suffering, that I didn't exist for all those centuries beforehand. Now, that second argument is a little bit more of a stretch. It's hard to say that I was missing out by not being alive at the time of Shakespeare. But nevertheless, it does feel like I might be missing out by not living longer than I will. So there's an interesting question of why. Why is it that I'm more troubled by the fact that I'm going to miss out on future stuff than that I missed out on past stuff? One suggestion is that if I had been born earlier, it would have been a different person. It wouldn't be my life that I would be missing out on. And it's precisely my life that I regret not having to end later than it is going to. And so there's maybe a suggestion that there's an important difference there, as well as the fact that I didn't have a life before I was born. So there was nothing for me to be deprived of before I was born. But I do have a life now, so there is something I can be deprived of after my death. So that's another possible way that we could object to Lucretius's argument. But between them, Epicurus and Lucretius offer some rather compelling, I think, arguments for why death shouldn't trouble us. And it's worth remembering again that this is all part of a broader project to bring us peace and tranquility, to give us a pleasant life by freeing us of the anxiety that we typically feel at the prospect of our own deaths.
You forgot to do the thing.
What thing?
The thing about the likes and the follows.
Oh, right. So if you like this video, do please consider giving it a thumbs up on YouTube, and maybe consider following this YouTube channel. The more likes and followers it gets, the more likely other people will get a chance to see it as well.